Greetings everyone. Today I wanted to talk about Star Wars a little bit and some topic that is close to my heart because the main issue with Star Wars fandom is that there is many levels of Star Wars fandom and that they all disagree with each other a lot, and that there is the problem with debating each other because the sources people pull are legit, if sometimes outdated. Now, the worst thing about scientific debates is that every single thing you have to say has to be proven by some source, so that people can look at the source and say, oh, that's good, or that's a bad source, or that's a completely wrong source. In religious debates, the problem is that there is no real source, and you can kind of interpret the sources that you want to touch on in pretty much any way you want to, and there is no real authority to turn to that everyone would accept. And it's the other problem with fantasy debates, that everything is ultimately just made up, and in fantasy debates these made up things are just, how do I say that, unprovable to begin with. In Star Wars, we kind of have all of that combined. If you weren't aware, Star Wars is a legit religion, like the whole Jedi Force thing. Yeah, that's actually an acknowledged religion in some countries on this planet, with religious rites and everything. You have people that are absolutely hell-bent on proving every single sentence that you utter, and there's people that just make up whatever or base their assumptions on the sources they know, which is, I mean, yeah, sure. But here is the problem with the levels of different fans, because you have the people that say that they are absolutely die-hard, hardcore Star Wars fans, and they have only watched the movies, and in most cases not even all of those. And when they say they watch the movies, they usually mean the trilogies and not the others like Solo and stuff like that. So they know one era of Star Wars, and that they only know on a very, very surface level. Yet they think that they understand everything about Star Wars, and that is, I don't want to say that they aren't fans, they really might be. What I'm saying is that you guys are missing out big time. Then you have the people that say that are Star Wars fans that kinda grew up with Star Wars, and we have multiple generations for whom this is true. The people that refer to this usually are the people of Gen Z, sometimes millennials, that grew up watching the Clone Wars TV show, the Rebels TV show, the movies that were available to that. And to you, I also say you have knowledge of one era of Star Wars, and you're missing out big time. Then you have the people that mostly, if not exclusively, know Star Wars from the video games. And the video games have the fantastic part that they explore three different eras of Star Wars, and that those eras are actually pretty darn cool, and there's so much more in-depth knowledge about Star Wars and how everything works in those. And then you have the fans that say you aren't a true fan unless you have actually read Star Wars material, like the magazines at the very least, that go a lot more in-depth in explaining things, or the books or the comics. And there's those that say you aren't a true Star Wars fan unless you have bought a metric F ton of merch, or you aren't a true Star Wars fan unless you've been to the Disney theme parks or done everything of the above. And I want to stress out that everyone who likes Star Wars is, in my eyes, a fan of Star Wars. Everyone who spends money on the stuff is a fan of Star Wars. Anyone who just enjoys the galaxy is a fan of Star Wars. And most fans of Star Wars are not aware of how huge Star Wars is. We have 5 decades of world building through various media. There's even pen and paper tabletop RPGs based on Star Wars that greatly expand on the Force and what it can and can't do, and what it is and isn't. And there is the other problem that if you are a fan of, say, the movies, you're never experiencing all the cool force powers and force things that existed before. As example, do you even know that sorcery, like legit sorcery, is a thing in Star Wars? I'm not talking about force push-pull, stuff like that. I'm meaning legit sorcery, magic rituals, which can accomplish things that you simply can't even dream of with the force powers that we see depicted in the movies and the TV shows. Are you aware that Sith alchemy is a thing, like legit alchemy? And I'm not talking just about creating potions, though that is a thing, like all kinds of enhancements through potions, from healing potions to potions that enhance your strength, your speed, your dexterity, to altering bodies, to completely evolving, forcefully evolving species into things you want. Like they made normal, very, very peaceful plant-eating animals into machines of war that are absolutely brutal monsters, really. Are you aware that Star Wars has gods, like legit divine entities that are immortal and have a understanding and power over the Force, that can do things that I sometimes wish wasn't even in Star Wars, like time travel and the whole multiverse stuff. And they just know things that we as enjoyers of Star Wars can't know, because that's never been laid out in detail, which I think is a good thing. Honestly, I think every time anything on the Force is said for certain, it creates new problems, and leaving it mystical is just a better option. Say midichlorians, you are aware of that. A big blunder in many fans' eyes, because midichlorians meant that now there's physical evidence for the Force, and now it's not a mystical, magical thing anymore, now it's just a science. And the main issue I'm taking with that is that it's not consistent. It says the higher midichlorian count is, the more powerful you are. But does that mean per cell? Because in that case, Darth Vader should have been just as powerful as Anakin Skywalker, because his count per cell didn't change at all. He should have had the exact same amount of power, but he did not, so that doesn't seem to be the case. But if it's the total amount of midichlorians in your system that makes the decision here, then species that have larger bodies should be much more powerful than species that have smaller bodies, because they have less cells and thus less midichlorians in total, which means that the Yoda species should be one of the weakest in the Force, which again clearly is not the case, so that's a contradiction right there. And there's many contradictions in Star Wars, and the main problem that I want to address in this video, with the contradictions and completely messing up fandom and all of that debate, is one of the largest debates of all, which is, what is the Force? Now, we still don't have a definite statement of that, but we do have a lot of statements that contradict each other. The most important of which is how the Force functions in the galaxy. As example, Yoda says that the Force is the balance, and that anything that is unbalanced is the dark side of the Force. So there is just the Force, and the dark side is just a corruption of the Force. That's the view that Jedi have. And while many say Yoda is wise and knowledgeable, he didn't really experience the dark side all that much. He didn't really use it all that much. His knowledge on the dark side is very, very limited. His entire Jedi Order doesn't have knowledge of the dark side to any noticeable degree, because they just didn't have to deal with the Sith or the teachings for over 1,000 years. And not to mention that Yoda, as Grandmaster of the Jedi, is kinda biased on this, and maybe not the most reliable source, because he's directly involved in all, and brainwashed as a child and been into this doctrine for 900 years. So how reliable is he when he says something about the Force? Meanwhile, many fans would say that George Lucas made the statement that Yoda is right, and that the Force is the balance, and anything unbalanced that goes too far, that is corruption, is the dark side. That's a statement Lucas made in the early 80s, I think, and believe it or not, it's been 5 decades since, and Lucas updated his view on the Force quite a lot, and he made a lot of newer statements, and most importantly, he signed off on projects that directly contradict this view, Yoda's view of the Force. As example, we have official artwork for a symbol representing the light side of the Force, an official symbol depicting the dark side of the Force, and an official Lucas approved symbol of the Force balance, the balanced way of the Force. And many people said, well, the Force isn't like yin and yang. Yes, it is. It absolutely is. The symbol of the balanced side is a merger of the dark and the light side of the Force symbols. So yes, it absolutely functions like yin and yang. And now, over decades later, we have so much material on this that I just don't understand how you can still think that the Force is how Yoda sees it, because we have grey Jedi, which according to this should not be possible, should not exist. And no, I'm not talking about Ahsoka and Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon, who are sometimes labeled as grey Jedi because they are going against whatever the Council of the Jedi wants. I'm talking about people who use the dark and the light side at the same time as people. We have people like Kyle Katarn doing this. If you go with Legends material, Luke does it. We have multiple orders of grey Force users that use both the dark and the light side. We have divine entities who use both. We have the original Jedi Order, not the Jedi, the Jedi, the old ones that both the Jedi and the Sith go back to, the original order of Force users in the galaxy. That one believed that there is two sides of the Force, the light and the dark, which they called the light side Ashla and the dark side Bogan, and that those two have to be balanced in order for life to thrive and the galaxy to work, that you have to use both. And they made sure that their people studied and practiced both. If you went too far dark side, you were banished and exiled to the moon of Ashla, the light side, until you regained your balance, because on Ashla there was pretty much only the light side present, so they would have Darksiders go there to regain the balance. Meanwhile, if you went the Yoda way and go way too much into the light side of the Force, they would banish you for a while to the moon of Bogan, which was a dark side nexus, and you would spend your time there until you regained your balance. Because on the planet which both these moons orbit, Tython, balance was critical, and if there was any imbalance between the light and the dark side of the Force on the planet, it would unleash hellish Force storms, which would devastate the countryside and the planet as a whole. So they really wanted to have the balance there. And you now have a cosmic, let's say, law of nature, like a planet reacting to a disbalance between the light and the dark side, which again means that the light and the dark side are extremes and the balance is in between. And that's depicted in comics, in movie, not in the well, with the Disney movies it was also in the movies, but it's depicted in the TV shows, in the games galore, in the RPG. We clearly know that the Force is yin and yang, and there is a light and a dark side, and the balance is in between those, and not what Yoda said. That's on, again, so many projects that Lucas signed off on, that we can be certain that Lucas changed his mind on this, just like he did with the midichlorian thing. So yeah, believe it or not, his ideas evolved in 5 decades. That can happen, and if you're a somewhat intelligent person, I hope that 5 decades from now you're not believing the exact same things that you're believing right now, because evolution and stuff, you should progress, you should refine your ideas, which happened with Star Wars. For those who don't know, Star Wars started out as a project for Flash Gordon, a Flash Gordon movie. That's what Lucas originally wanted to make. He couldn't get the rights, so he made his own thing and drew from many different sources. Like, lightsabers are not a Star Wars invention. They existed before in other franchises, but Lucas made them super popular. And for all those that cry now, that's most of the artistic things happening. Like, most artists are seen as super creative because they somehow manage to use material that is so unknown to most that nobody calls them out on it. That said, though, if you make severe enough changes, which Lucas did, you can say it's original artwork, even though it was clearly inspired by something else. So I'm not saying that Lucas was an artist or didn't do a great job. He absolutely did, but it's not entirely his thing either, because Lucas himself mostly made the movies and contributed to the Rebels and Clone Wars TV shows, but he was not really involved in the world building done in the books, in the comics, in the video games, or anything like that. That's what he read and signed off on, and gave a little guideline on what can be done and cannot be done. So everything that's out there in the media was approved by Lucas, which again means that yes, there is a grey side, and yes, there is a light and a dark side, and the balance is to be found in between, and Yoda was plainly wrong about this. And the sad part is that people always come back with the argument that, but Lucas said that there is balance and there is unbalance, and that this balance is the dark side, which is again just not true. This balance can happen both ways, and indeed, if the dark side is the imbalancing thing, then there is needless violence, death, suffering, fear, and stuff like that. If the light side is too much, you get arrogance, you get negligence, you get a stalemate of forces, you stop evolution, you stop progressing, and decay starts to happen, which is also what we see in galactic history. Whenever the Sith ruled, they destroyed themselves. Whenever the Jedi ruled, everything went to shit and just crumbled around them. That's just how things go. If you look at, say, the New Republic, how corrupt was that? How much crime was there? The Sith rule didn't have issues like that. They had different issues. But again, that's a topic for another video, and I hope I managed to clear that up in this video, that again, the Force is like yin and yang. That is the official thing that we see across media, and I hope that this argument is coming up all the time in the future.